The call arrived at 7:42 p.m. on a Wednesday. No greeting, no introduction, only my father's voice, precise and curt, as if reading from a corporate statement. Don't bother attending the family gathering. We're severing all connections. That was everything. 18 words. 18 syllables, if I counted the pause just before he disconnected. I listened to it again, not out of disbelief, but because somehow I thought it would stir a stronger reaction in me. That evening, I anticipated a surge of anger or a jolt of pain, yet a sense of calmness washed over me instead. It felt as though a part of me, always quietly expecting this moment, had finally been given confirmation. My name is Morgan Pike. I am the younger of two siblings. My father, Frank Pike, started Pike Motor Works from scratch, first working as a mechanic, then running a franchise, and eventually leading a regional chain. My older brother, Colby Pike, became the successor my father had always hoped for. Captivating, wild, and untouchable described him, while I was always the dependable one working behind the scenes, quietly ensuring everything ran smoothly. I didn't return the call that evening. I chose not to question the reason. I didn't even pass the voicemail along to my mother, who typically distanced herself when business issues got uncomfortable. All I did was send him a short text. Understood. After that, I powered up my laptop, logged into the loan portal I'd neglected for months, and took an action none of them could have anticipated. I took my own name off, not out of resentment or malice, but with clear intent. Back in April 2021, when my family needed to lock in a $1.9 million loan to expand the business, the bank required a secondary signer with an excellent credit score. Colby was in debt. My father had more negotiating power. With my spotless financials and a Radcliffe University MBA, I was their natural choice. There was no need for pleading. They simply set the documents before me and expected I would sign, and so I did. Back in those days, I still believed that loyalty was the ticket to belonging. But here I was, alone at my kitchen table, with the voicemail playing faintly in the background, when a different realization struck me. My family had never truly shut me out. Instead, they had simply validated something they'd been doing subtly all along. Only this time, I was prepared to finish their thought for them. I once believed my father valued order above all else. But as the years passed, I understood it wasn't organization he craved, but rather absolute control. My father constructed Pike Motor Works just as he assembled our home. Everything was built methodically, each brick, each rule, leaving no space for tenderness. The shop always took precedence. The family was secondary, and sometimes even less important than that. My father was fond of a certain phrase, reciting it not just to the staff, but especially to us. We don't hire outsiders, we raise replacements. And that's exactly what Colby and I were. Future substitutes. Successors, at least in theory. Colby was 3 years my senior, more outgoing, braver, and always managed to stay just beyond the boundaries of responsibility. Yet he possessed the charisma my father admired, a proud posture that Frank Pike saw reflected from his own youth. As a result, Colby earned the accolades, the repeated forgiveness, the extra rope. I was left holding the clipboard. When I was 13, my job was to record tire deliveries in LedgerSwift. At 17, I handled payroll at our third branch, while everyone else was on spring break. I didn't volunteer. I was simply directed. No words of thanks, no explanations, only the silent demand that I be present wherever needed, compliant, accessible, and relentless for the business. My mother, Vivian Pike, was never unkind. She just faded into her responsibilities, preparing meals, sealing bills in envelopes, wearing a polite smile at meetings, and then pulling me aside to whisper that my father was building a future for all of us, so I should be appreciative, sweetheart. So I tried to be grateful, or at least to act like it. I hit the books, earned my MBA, and then I turned down a corporate logistics position in Denver, since my father said that family mattered more than ambition. He needed assistance with overseeing the regional growth. Colby was supposedly concentrating on the long-term direction. I handled all of the other responsibilities. When it came time to secure financing for our new main office, I negotiated the lease agreement, compared offers from 7 banks, and secured a contract with favorable conditions and a 2-year interest lock. Still, the bank required a second signature. Colby was unable to provide his because his credit was a disaster. My father refused to risk any personal assets, so they looked to me for help. There was no heartfelt talk or special meal, just documents already spread out and a pen with the cap removed. I paused for only a moment, but then I went ahead and signed, because deep down, I hoped that if I proved how loyal and necessary I was, they might finally recognize me as a true member of the plan, not just the fallback. Naturally, they did not. I never received any thanks. They always seemed to think it was simply my responsibility. That was April 2021. At the time, I believed I was building toward a future we'd all enjoy together. I had no idea then that I was making myself so indispensable, I faded into the background. After staying silent for so long, I started convincing myself that being invisible could pass for love. But that's a lie. It's merely quiet, misread as harmony. The first sign of trouble wasn't a shattering noise. It actually sounded like someone laughing. More specifically, it was Colby's laughter. We happened to be in the March quarterly review. Only the 3 of us attended. Me, my older brother Colby, and my father Frank. I had pointed out a vendor bill, a $10,000 charge duplicated over 4 months. It seemed like a straightforward mistake. Or at least, that's what I thought. Colby brushed it off, saying, "That's from a buddy of mine," and dismissively acted as if he were flicking dust off his shirt. He told us not to worry about it, adding that the supplier gave us favorable prices in other areas. I glanced toward my father, hoping for his reaction. Maybe a slight lift of an eyebrow or a single questioning word. Yet Frank didn't even bat an eye. He simply grabbed his mug and told me, "Keep your attention on the big picture, Morgan. You need to stop behaving like someone on the outside. Outsider." That word was more than a jab. It burrowed somewhere deep beneath my skin. I wasn't some newcomer brought in on a whim. I had managed logistics for 5 site expansions, renegotiated our vehicle contracts for half their initial price, and balanced payroll through 2 periods of supply chain chaos. Still, any time I brought up a topic that didn't involve spreadsheets or blind agreement, I was treated as if I didn't belong. After that meeting, there was a noticeable but subtle shift. To start, my permissions for our internal systems became more restricted. I found myself unable to access vendor portals. Soon after, the main financial dashboard allowed me to view data, but not edit it. The corporate credit card assigned to me expired, and a replacement was never issued. Whenever I pressed for an explanation, I always heard the same response about restructuring, temporary system changes, or worse, "Don't let it worry you." Still, I noticed that Colby had acquired a new adjustable desk, had expensed a trip to Reno under the title of a leadership summit, and was sitting in a chair that cost more than what I paid for my first used vehicle. Something stirred within me. It wasn't anger, at least, not yet, but a quiet sense of vigilance. It was the feeling I get when my intuition whispers that someone is arranging a door just for me, one that only opens one way. I started saving duplicates of every document. I collected internal expenditure summaries, meeting minutes, and emails where Colby included clients but signed my name. After dark, I sorted them all into a private file on my home computer. I named this folder Shadow Ledger. I didn't exactly know what I was constructing, just that I wanted to keep hold of reality while I still possessed it. One night, I contacted Rachel Monroe, who had once studied with me in law school. We hadn't spoken in years, but she stepped in when her sister needed help with a tangled real estate split. I kept the details from Rachel Monroe, sharing just enough context to ask a direct question. What happens if someone co-signing a commercial loan pulls their name? Rachel's hesitation said a lot. It varies. If I'm not personally guaranteeing the debt and haven't been part of any recent financial missteps, then my name can be quietly removed after review. I felt a silent relief pass through me, a sense that I could do this properly, by the book. In that moment, I couldn't tell whether I was preparing for a departure or assembling a defense. The truth I landed on was that the role I thought I filled, Morgan Pike, the dutiful child propping up the legacy, no longer belonged to me. I realized they weren't just forcing me aside. They were taking their time, making sure to benefit from my lack of protest. It was Wednesday morning in late March when everything finally made sense. The trees just beyond my office window were just beginning to show fresh growth. That specific detail stands out to me because the sight of emerging foliage only emphasized how dated what I was about to discover felt. I had just received my mid-month credit review, a document I checked more out of routine than concern. Yet this time, a particular entry caught my attention. Pike Group, LLC Deferred Payment Review. It had been ages since I'd seen that entity referenced. Pike Group, LLC was a shell company my father, Frank, had set up for dormant real estate assets. Or at least, that's what I'd believed. With my curiosity piqued, I looked into it further. The information I uncovered wasn't merely disappointing. 502 Bad Gateway. Unable to reach the origin service. The service may be down, or it may not be responding to traffic from Cloudflared. The company was struggling, managing to stay afloat only because of grace periods and postponed vendor bills. My signature remained tied to the loan. Even more troubling, my name kept appearing in communications from creditors, as justification to be generous because my credit record remained spotless. Since my personal finances were never compromised, I was, just as always, the dependable sibling. But it had been months since I'd reviewed any financial statements. I hadn't attended a board meeting since last autumn. The last time I requested an update from Colby, his answer was a wink emoji. He added, "No worries, sis. Big vision's coming." But vision alone couldn't keep the lights on. I accessed old files, followed invoices going back 5 quarters, and compared expenses to projections I had prepared myself. That's when I saw it. Over $35,000 in consulting payments, routed entirely to a friend of Colby's. Multiple entries labeled marketing testing had no associated campaign work. Fleet maintenance charges were tripled, and supplier authorizations bore my initials, none of which I'd approved. This wasn't incompetence. It was intentional. Later that day, I had another meeting with Rachel Monroe, this time face-to-face. We sat across from each other in a quiet booth at a coffee shop she liked near the courthouse. I laid out every piece of information for her. She slowly paged through the paperwork, her mouth set in a firm line and her gaze unwavering. When she arrived at the co-signed loan contract, she paused. "You're not named as a guarantor," she pointed out. I stared in confusion. "What does that mean?" I asked. She explained, "It means they used your name for the loan, but legally, you're not responsible if you remove yourself before restructuring." "And if I choose to do that?" I asked, as Rachel set the documents aside, folded her hands, and spoke words that have stayed with me ever since. She advised, "You don't have to confront them, raise your voice, or alert anyone. Simply remove the cornerstone and let the structure collapse on its own." That evening, I returned home and opened the folder I had relabeled. Once called the Shadow Ledger, it now bore the name Redemption Plan. Inside, I found PDFs, emails marked for action, screenshots of accounts, and a draft letter that Rachel had helped me compose several weeks earlier. Some time ago, Back when I still second-guessed my actions, I would have hesitated. I no longer paused like that. They hadn't just excluded me. They had taken advantage of me until they decided there was nothing left I could offer. Perhaps they were right. 502 Bad Gateway. Unable to reach the origin service. The service may be down, or it may not be responding to traffic from Cloudflared. At that time, I enjoyed unrestricted entry, believing I was creating something meaningful. The monitor blinked momentarily, then displayed an alert. Co-applicant status still enabled. The editable fields were accessible. I selected the option to remove myself. After that, I attached the finalized withdrawal notice that Rachel Monroe and I had put together 4 weeks earlier. I entered my PIN and hit submit. No alerts went off, and no acknowledgement emails arrived. Only a simple line of muted gray text appeared at the bottom edge of the display. Update acknowledged. Awaiting compliance review. That was it. Done. My next move involved risk mitigation. I sent an email to the bank's loan officer, Clyde Griffin, who had been my point of contact during the phase of expanding the business. I included a report detailing financial irregularities, evidence of vendor scams, forged authorizations, and changes to permissions that suggested someone from inside was cutting me out. I made sure everything was precise, direct, and businesslike. What I left out was a formal demand. Less than 60 minutes later, the bank suspended transactions on the operating account linked to Pike Group, LLC, and quietly began their internal audit of the loan. There was no public notice, no phone call to my father, and no message sent to Colby, only an abrupt halt, a digital pause in a place where unquestioning confidence had once been the rule. While the bank conducted its own investigation, I took additional action. I reached out to my personal accountant, Natalie Lynn, who had earned my trust during my graduate studies. Together, we analyzed my risk and ran simulations of possible worst outcome scenarios. She confirmed what Rachel had already explained. There was no personal responsibility, my credit was unaffected, and I wasn't even legally required to inform anyone. The trust account where I had transferred my savings the previous mid-month remained secure. That evening, for the first time in many years, I put my phone on silent and genuinely meant it. I finally slept. When I awoke the following morning, I already had 28 missed calls. By mid-afternoon, there were 62 from my mother, 17 from my father, 8 from Colby, and 2 from numbers I didn't recognize until I played the voicemail. It was Julian Faber, our veteran company accountant. His voice sounded strained, almost frantic, on the verge of breaking. "Morgan, call me right away. This is urgent. The loan is crumbling. The bank has pulled out. We're about to default. I needed to resolve this. Did I hear him? I had to fix this." I played it back a second time. Not because I was unsure of his meaning, but because it felt like retribution. And when retribution finally comes, it doesn't shout, it echoes. By dusk, Colby sent his first message. "What on earth did you do?" Soon after, another message came. "You're blowing this out of proportion. We could have resolved this among ourselves." Yet the idea of we no longer held any meaning. There hadn't been an us in ages. That evening, my mother, Vivian Pike, left me a voicemail. Her voice wasn't angry, but instead soft and shaking. "Sweetheart, what's going on? Your father, Frank, says the bank has frozen everything. They might demand the loan back. Did you sign any papers?" I had, but I didn't clarify. I called her back and let the phone ring twice. All I did was remove my own name. Her breathing hitched. "But you can't simply do that." "Actually, I can," I replied. "And I have," I added, prompting her to go silent. "Morgan, this has consequences for every one of us." "No," I answered steadily. "You ensured that it wouldn't." Then I ended the call, not out of anger, but with a sense of finality. They chose the place where we always used to eat for birthdays, Monroe Bistro, with its old brick walls, an overabundance of ceiling fans, and the small private space by the fireplace where we had once snuffed out candles and raised glasses of ginger ale. But now, there weren't any balloons, no cake either. Just my parents, Frank Pike and Vivian Pike, seated rigidly at one end of the table, while my older brother, Colby Pike, glared at his phone, acting as if this whole thing was beneath him. At the table, one empty chair seemed to wait for me, as if they still hoped I might be compelled to show up. I made sure to arrive 12 minutes late, fully intentional. I chose gray slacks and a button-up blouse, neutral and impossible to interpret. Rachel Monroe once advised me that real power never needs to raise its voice. It comes in without needing to explain itself. When I walked in, Colby rose to greet me. "Thanks for coming," I answered. "I didn't do this for you," lowering myself deliberately into the seat. There was no point in wasting anyone's time here. Frank leaned in, staring intently at me. The message I sent was impossible to ignore. No. I kept my tone even as I spoke. The bank had clearly reinforced my argument. I had simply stopped covering for his falsehood. His mouth drew tight with tension. My mother, Vivian, shifted in her seat, clearly uneasy. "We're doing our best to keep everything afloat," he insisted. "You think you're hurting us, Morgan, but the real damage is to the legacy your grandfather started." I met his stare, unflinching. "Grandpa opened a garage. You made it an autocracy." Colby let out a dismissive huff. "Oh, please. We provided for you in every way." "You offered me a position," I replied, locking eyes with him, "but never a say in anything." A weighted silence filled the room, thick and strangely comforting, like a space that had finally stopped pretending. Then, almost in a hush, my mother, Vivian, finally spoke. "What is it you want, Morgan?" That was the heart of it, wasn't it? I wasn't seeking payback. I'd already taken care of that. At this point, all I wanted was some sense of transparency. I reached into my tote and set a sealed envelope on the table. "This is a signed statement confirming that I've permanently exited the company loan, the board, and all aspects of business management. You are never to use my name going forward." Frank opened his mouth to respond, but I stopped him with a raised hand. "I'm not done yet." Drawing in a breath, I continued, "I'm also planning to send an anonymous report to the state auditor. There are missing funds, invoices left unpaid, and irregularities with payroll." I pushed the envelope across the table toward them. "Legally, the entire situation is officially your problem now." Colby's cheeks flushed with anger. "You're destroying us all because of your pride." "I'm not ruining anything," I replied as I rose to my feet. "All I'm doing is dispelling the pretense that I had anything to do with it to begin with." I started walking toward the exit. From behind me, for the very first time, my father, Frank, uttered the single word I never imagined hearing. "Morgan, please." I stopped, not out of doubt, but because I felt satisfied. "You left me a voicemail ending things between us," I answered without facing them. "I'm only making it official now." Then I walked away. The account ended up making it into the news. Not any major publications. Just a discreet article in a nearby industry newsletter. Pike Motor Works faces financial upheaval as internal rifts widen. I hadn't been the one to make it public, but I knew exactly who was responsible. Rachel Monroe reached out to me 3 days later, her tone partly stern, partly amused. "When people lose control," she told me, "they search for a scapegoat." They simply hadn't anticipated that the scapegoat would have already departed. After that, the messages became harsher. From my father, Frank Pike, how could I be so thankless? He said they built that company for my sake and accused me of throwing away my opportunities. Then there were messages from Colby Pike. 502 Bad Gateway. Unable to reach the origin service. The service may be down, or it may not be responding to traffic from Cloudflared. They ruined everything long before I left. They ruined it the moment they put my name on it, but refused to give me a real voice in the decisions. When they started seeing me as a threat instead of their youngest, when they decided to erase me. By that point, the loan was collapsing. The company's accounts were locked, suppliers were backing out of their contracts, and yet I remained completely unaffected. No legal consequences landed on me. I suffered no financial harm. My credit stayed perfect, and my savings were untouched. I sent the final voicemail to Rachel Monroe before deleting all the others. I turned the ringer back on, and for the first time in ages, my phone stayed silent. No emergencies, no pleas for help, no disasters waiting for me alone to solve. I relocated to a modest loft in downtown Eugene. It wasn't luxurious, just filled with sunlight, spotless windows, and enough room for my desk and a bit of tranquility. I began working as a consultant on the side, quietly advising women-run startups on how to avoid the pitfalls I had barely survived. It wasn't because I needed to find meaning. I was already certain of mine. 502 Bad Gateway. Unable to reach the origin service. The service may be down, or it may not be responding to traffic from Cloudflared. This letter confirms that the business loan associated with Pike Motor Works has been formally withdrawn and restructured. There were no outstanding obligations, no next steps, no gratitude expressed, no apology offered, no justification, just a final declaration, legal and unambiguous. I filed the letter in a folder labeled Finished, then tucked it in the back of my filing cabinet. That evening, I lit a candle by the window. My loft was still and peaceful. The city outside continued its unaware, relentless buzz. 502 Bad Gateway. Unable to reach the origin service. The service may be down, or it may not be responding to traffic from Cloudflared. What they hadn't foreseen was that I would flourish inside that imposed quiet. That I would create something, not out of retribution, but out of resolve. Something that felt abstract, almost detached from reality. I filled a wine glass, started a fresh client document, and at the top, I wrote a single sentence. You're not hard to see. You're simply no longer hidden. Then I continued.